Welcome to Congress in Context.
It's great to be here.
So if you were to look at, the news coverage from mid-April 2026, you'd think the United States government was entirely consumed by screaming matches.
Oh, absolutely. Just constitutional crises left and right.
Right. And like the looming threat of global conflict, you see all the yelling, the grandstanding, the polarized outrage on TV.
Yeah, it's exhausting for anyone watching.
It really is. But our mission for today's deep dive is to step past those fragmented headlines. We're actually diving into the physical pages of the congressional record from April 9, 13, and 14, 2026.
Right. Going straight to the source material.
Exactly. To synthesize what actually happened on the floor. So we're going to look at the heated debates, yes, but we are also pulling apart the procedural mechanics and the written extensions of remarks.
Which I think is the most interesting part, honestly.
It really is. Because we want to show you how these massive, seemingly distant national proceedings connect directly to your local community.
I mean, it's the difference between watching a movie trailer and reading the actual script, right? The congressional record serves as the unedited diary of the United States government.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and when you read it cover to cover, you realize the institution is designed to manage two radically different realities at the exact same time.
And that split-screen reality is really the hook for today's deep dive. Because here is what stands out immediately when you look at these primary sources. In the exact same room, on the exact same days, this legislative body will fiercely debate a potential global war and border security.
The loud stuff.
Right, the loud stuff. And then they turn around and pass unanimous legislation about local high school basketball teams, farming conservation, and post offices.
It's pretty jarring when you see it on paper.
It's totally wild. So we're inviting you to step into the pages of the record with us to see how your community is represented in both the chaotic national battles and the quiet structural maintenance of the country.
Well, to understand that structure, you really have to look at the macro tensions first. The floor debate from this period illustrates the raw machinery of partisan priority setting.
Like drawing battle lines.
Exactly. Lawmakers are actively trying to force the media and the opposing party to acknowledge completely different national emergencies.
And we see that vividly in the Senate transcripts from April 13. The tension over foreign policy is just palpable.
Oh, yeah. Very intense.
You have Senator Schumer of New York, and over on the House side, Representative Courtney of Connecticut speaking with immense urgency about the War Powers Act.
Right.
They're focused on escalating tensions with Iran, heavily criticizing the president's actions, and warning about the geopolitical fallout of unchecked military escalation.
And including the very real threat to global stability and rising gas prices.
Yeah.
And we have to look at the mechanism they're invoking there. The War Powers Act is a deliberate structural check. It's designed to prevent the executive branch from committing U.S. forces to an armed conflict without the consent of Congress.
It's a big deal.
Huge deal. When leaders like Schumer and Courtney bring this to the floor, they aren't just giving a speech. They are arguing over the fundamental constitutional authority to wage war. It is an incredibly high-stakes maneuver.
But then the moment you look across the aisle, the focus shifts entirely away from the Middle East.
Like night and day.
Right.
Yeah.
You have Senator Grassley of Iowa taking the floor to discuss traveling across 25 counties in his state, insisting that the #1 issue devastating his constituents is inflation.
Yeah.
Then, Senator Barrasso of Wyoming and Senator Thune of South Dakota demand immediate long-term funding for immigration and customs enforcement and the Border Patrol.
They were laying down a really hard line.
Yeah, a hard June 1 deadline for action. They're arguing that the Department of Homeland Security is effectively being shut down.
Right. And I should probably jump in here. For anyone listening, we have to state explicitly that in this deep dive, we are not taking a side or endorsing any of these viewpoints.
Absolutely not.
Our goal is to impartially analyze this divide, merely conveying the starkly different realities and priorities being argued on the floor of the House and Senate. What we're observing is how the floor is used to establish competing realities.
Which is fascinating.
Right. One coalition is demanding that the constitutional crisis abroad is the existential threat, while the other is demanding that the economic and border crises at home are the true existential threats.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because right in the middle of these intense, globally focused speeches, the record notes a very specific mundane procedural phrase.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, over and over again, right before Senator Thune speaks and right before Senator Schumer speaks, the transcript just says quorum call.
Yep.
Is a quorum call just a congressional timeout or a pause button? What's going on there?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the quorum call is one of the most vital yet misunderstood mechanisms of congressional time management. Technically, under the Constitution, a quorum is a simple majority of senators, so 51 people required to be present to conduct business. But in modern practice, a quorum call is rarely about actually counting heads.
Wait, if they aren't counting heads, what is the clerk doing when they slowly read out those names? I've seen it on C-SPAN. It takes forever.
Yeah, they are manufacturing time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Senate operates largely on a principle called unanimous consent, which means any single senator can object and derail the entire day's agenda. So when negotiations hit a wall or tempers flare over issues like Iran or the border, any senator can suggest the absence of a quorum.
Oh, wow.
And then the clerk begins calling the 100 names incredibly slowly. This legally pauses all floor action. It creates this window of dead air where the cameras are still rolling, but nothing is happening.
So it's essentially a manufactured freeze frame.
Exactly.
While the public sees a fiery debate on television, the actual management of the institution relies on these procedural pauses so the real work can happen in the cloakroom.
Right. Lawmakers are out in the hallways negotiating, cutting deals, or just, waiting for the next speaker to walk into the chamber.
That's incredible.
It reveals how much of the institution's power lies in the control of the clock. A quorum call is the emergency brake they pull to prevent the deeply polarized debates from completely breaking the legislative machinery.
Which brings us to a completely different side of that machinery. So we go from the stalled partisan gridlock of the Senate floor on April 13th and transition to the House floor on April 14th.
Right, a totally different vibe.
Completely. This is where we see actual bipartisan legislation passing with massive, staggering majorities. Let's look at H.R. 1011, the Emergency Conservation Program Improvement Act of 2025.
This is a textbook example of the quiet, functional work of Congress that rarely makes the evening news.
Right, so this bill was introduced by Representatives Letlow of Louisiana, and it passed with a vote of 395 to 10.
You almost never hear about 390-plus vote majorities.
Never. And to understand the local impact, you have to read the remarks from Representative Tukuta of Hawaii. She took the floor to explain how catastrophic Kona-low storms had just devastated the islands.
The numbers she brought up were staggering.
Yeah, the statistics she entered into the record are difficult to even comprehend. She noted the storm dumped 2 trillion gallons of water on Hawaii.
2 trillion.
With some areas receiving over 36 inches of rain in a single 24-hour period.
That represents a once-in-a-thousand-year weather event. And this raises an important question, right? Why does a local disaster in Hawaii compel nearly 400 members of Congress to vote yes on a bill sponsored by a representative from Louisiana?
Right, what's the connection?
It's because the underlying mechanism of the Agricultural Credit Act of 1978 was broken. When a disaster of that magnitude strikes, the bureaucratic red tape can delay emergency funds for years.
Oh, man.
So H.R. 1011 practically removes those barriers so agricultural producers and forest landowners can actually access the money they need to recover.
So it's structural maintenance. They are going under the hood of a 50-year-old law and fixing a very specific gear. So a family farm in Louisiana or a forest in Hawaii doesn't go bankrupt waiting for paperwork.
Exactly. It's practical problem solving.
And that wasn't the only massive bipartisan bill passed that day.
Yeah.
We also have H.R. 7613, the ALERT Act, the Airspace Location and Enhanced Risk Transparency Act.
Yeah, sponsored by a highly bipartisan coalition. Representative Graves of Missouri, Representative Larson of Washington, Representative Rogers of Alabama, and Representative Smith of Washington.
Really crossing the aisle.
Totally. And like the conservation bill, it passed 396 to 10.
Now, the record details a horrific catalyst for this legislation. In January 2025, a midair collision occurred near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and American Airlines Flight 5342.
Yeah.
67 people lost their lives.
It was a completely preventable tragedy. And usually following aviation disasters, the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they conduct an investigation and issue recommendations.
Right, the NTSB reports.
But the NTSB doesn't have the power to make laws, right? They can only suggest changes to the FAA. And usually, those recommendations languish in bureaucratic review for years.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Congress didn't just hold a hearing and issue a press release. The ALERT Act is the legislative hammer.
Yep.
The bill forces the implementation of all 50 NTSB recommendations. It mandates collision mitigation technology on aircraft, overhauls helicopter route safety around major airports, and legally requires the Department of Defense to integrate better with the national airspace system.
It's a massive overhaul.
So what does this all mean when the cameras are off? Is Congress actually just a giant plumbing company fixing the practical pipes of the country, like aviation safety and farm relief?
You know, the plumbing analogy is highly accurate, but it goes deeper than that. Congress is the only institution capable of overriding entrenched federal bureaucracies.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the 390-plus vote majorities prove that when a system catastrophically fails, whether through a 1,000-year storm or a tragic airspace collision, the day-to-day work of the legislature is profoundly practical.
Yeah.
They bypass standard polarized floor debate, often using specialized rules to quickly repair the physical infrastructure of the nation.
It's wild to think about the cognitive whiplash, though. The same lawmakers who were fundamentally at odds over the constitutionality of potential war on Monday sat down on Tuesday to unanimously agree on how helicopter transponders should communicate with air traffic control.
Right. It's kind of surreal.
Very. But if we want to see the ultimate expression of that local, practical focus, we have to zoom in even further. We move from national aviation safety down to how Congress immortalizes specific local citizens in the National Archive.
Ah, you're referring to the flurry of bills dedicated to naming local post offices.
I am. And on the surface, it's easy to dismiss this as trivial or, purely symbolic.
You sure?
I certainly used to dismiss it. But look at the specific heroes being immortalized here. You have H.R. 50 Valhive, which honors volunteer firefighter Trevor Brown, who lost his life responding to an emergency gas leak in Sterling, Virginia.
Right. And by naming a federal building after firefighter Brown, Congress is anchoring his specific sacrifice to the physical geography of his hometown.
Powerful.
It transforms a standard government building into a permanent monument for a local family.
And it is also used to rectify massive historical oversights. Like, consider H.R. 4635, which honors Tech Sergeant Evelyn V. Minter in Ohio.
Oh, this is a great one.
She was part of the 600 and 888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the legendary 688 All-Black Women's Army Corps unit during World War II.
The mechanics of what that unit achieved are just astounding. They were sent to Europe to sort a backlog of millions of pieces of mail in unheated, rat-infested aircraft hangars.
Wow.
Working around the clock to reconnect soldiers on the front lines with their families, and for decades, their contribution was largely ignored by national history.
Which is awful.
Yeah, so placing Sergeant Minter's name on a federal post office is a deliberate legislative act to etch her service into the permanent record of the United States.
And that desire to immortalize local history brings us to a very specific, really fascinating section of the congressional record, the extensions of remarks.
My favorite part.
For those who don't know, this is a section where lawmakers can officially enter speeches, tributes, and local achievements into the permanent historical record, even if they never had the time to speak those words out loud on the floor of the House or Senate.
It's a brilliant political and historical mechanism, honestly. Floor time is the most heavily rationed resource in Washington. So the extensions of remarks allow representatives to bypass the clock entirely and elevate local milestones to the national stage.
And the specificity of these entries is what makes them so compelling. For instance, while not spoken on the floor, Representative Andy Barr submitted a statement emphasizing the achievements of the George Rogers Clark High School boys and girls basketball teams in Winchester, Kentucky.
See, that entry permanently catalogs a high school sports victory in the exact same historical document that houses declarations of war and the passage of civil rights legislation.
It literally places the micro right next to the macro.
Yeah.
We see it again with local business. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Josh Harder submitted a statement emphasizing the 125th anniversary of the Greater Stockton Chamber of Commerce in California.
Which serves to highlight the economic resilience of a specific region, formally recognizing the small businesses that actually sustain the local tax base.
Exactly. Lawmakers also use it for broad awareness campaigns. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Chrissy Houlihan submitted a statement emphasizing National Donut Life Month, utilizing the permanent record to stress the critical, ongoing need for organ donation.
That's a great use of the record.
And finally, they use it to honor the unseen pillars of a community. While not spoken on the floor, Representative Sanford Bishop submitted a statement emphasizing the lifelong service of retiring Pastor Raymond Cochran in Georgia.
A man described beautifully in the submitted record as having a life that was a sermon in motion.
It's a beautiful phrase, but I have to push back here for a second.
Okay.
If we acknowledge that floor time is precious, and we know no one is actually reading these remarks out loud in the chamber,
Yeah.
isn't this just an empty gesture, like posting on a message board no one reads? Why go through the bureaucratic trouble?
What's fascinating here is that you are viewing the congressional record through the lens of a daily newspaper when you actually need to view it as a multi-generational time capsule.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the extensions of remarks are not designed to generate headlines for the current news cycle. They exist for history. They weave the granular fabric of American communities, the high school athletes, the chambers of commerce, the retiring pastors, into the permanent narrative of the country.
So it prevents the history of the United States from being exclusively top-down.
Precisely. When genealogists, sociologists, or, descendants look back at this week in 2026, 200 years from now, they won't just see the actions of presidents and generals. Because of this mechanism, they will see Pastor Raymond Cochran. They'll understand the values of the Stockton Chamber of Commerce. It also serves a deeply practical political purpose for the representatives. It proves to their constituents that they are paying attention to the micro-level events in their districts, even while navigating global crises.
It really is the ultimate scrapbook of the American experience, maintained at the highest level of government.
Absolutely.
Well, let's synthesize this entire journey. We started this deep dive by looking at the absolute partisan tension over the War Powers Act, the crisis in Iran, and the demands for Border Patrol funding. We explored how procedural tools, like the quorum call, are used to manage the clock and keep the institution from fracturing under that pressure.
Right. And from there, we move past the gridlock to examine the quiet, practical bipartisanship that actually maintains the country, bypassing standard rules to pass the Alert Act and implement all 50 NTSB recommendations for aviation safety, and overhauling the Agricultural Credit Act to fund farm conservation after catastrophic Hawaiian storms.
And finally, we rested on the hyperlocal, deeply human function of Congress. We saw how lawmakers deliberately use post office renamings and the extensions of remarks to ensure that fallen volunteer firefighters, WWII postal battalions, and local high school basketball teams are forever written into the national story.
It is a vital reminder that Congress is a highly complex ecosystem. It operates as the loud, necessary pressure valve for our deepest ideological divisions, while simultaneously serving as a surprisingly functional workshop for practical problem solving.
It really completely reframes how you look at a 30-second news clip, knowing how much mechanical work is happening beneath the surface. And for anyone who wants to read these tributes to local heroes themselves, or dive deeper into the specific floor debates we analyzed today, you can look up these specific remarks and the full record for today's date at congress.gov.
As we conclude today's analysis, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own. Decades from now, when historians open this specific week of the congressional record, will they learn more about America from our fiery geopolitical debates or from the quiet, unanimous votes we took to name a post office after a local hero?